Jada Johnson sat nervously in the back of the classroom, the notes from her piano practice drifting through her mind like an endless loop. She had been playing the piano since she was 6, but today was different. Today, she was facing him. Mr. Evans. Her piano teacher. A man who had never believed in her, not really. At least, not in the way that she needed him to. Jada glanced at the other students, sitting attentively at their desks, their fingers gripping their pencils as they scribbled notes, unaware of the storm swirling in her mind. The sound of her heart thudded loudly in her chest, a constant reminder of the pressure she felt to prove herself. It had always been this way at Eastbrook High, a school where black students were a minority and the world around her rarely seemed to acknowledge the unique strength and talent she carried. "All right, class," Mr. Evans announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Today we're going to discuss the recital next week. I expect each of you to choose a classical piece to perform. Remember, it's not just about playing the notes, it's about conveying the emotion, the history, and the soul of the music." Jada couldn't help but feel a spark of determination ignite within her. The recital. It was an opportunity. A chance to show everyone what she was truly capable of. But then, she remembered. Mr. Evans. He hadn't believed in her last year. He'd barely acknowledged her presence in his class. It wasn't just that he was a tough teacher, he was dismissive. When Jada had first auditioned for the advanced piano class, he'd looked at her like she didn't belong there, as if her skin color alone meant she wasn't capable of playing the masterpieces he revered. He'd told her she wasn't quite ready for that level of music. And though it hurt at the time, the words had stuck with her. His doubt had planted a seed of uncertainty in her mind that she couldn't seem to shake. "I'll be choosing who will be in each group, and we'll go from there," Mr. Evans continued. "Jada, I'm going to have you work with the lower group for this recital. Maybe, with some extra practice, you'll be ready for more advanced pieces later on." Jada's stomach churned. Lower group. She had worked so hard, spent countless hours practicing, and this is what she was going to get. She couldn't understand how he could be so dismissive of her talent. But there was no way she was going to let him dictate her abilities. Her hand twitched with the desire to raise it, to say something, to argue, but she held herself back. This was not the time for confrontation, not yet, at least. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some with pity, others with judgment. Jada forced herself to stay calm, to take a deep breath and focus on the task ahead. She would not let Mr. Evans, or anyone, define her by their expectations. "Now, remember," Mr. Evans said, as he moved around the classroom handing out sheet music. "Your performance will be judged on technique, expression, and overall presentation. Do your best." As the class began to disperse, Jada stood, her body stiff with frustration. She grabbed the sheet music from Mr. Evans' desk, avoiding his eyes as much as possible. She could feel the weight of his judgment pressing down on her, but she refused to let it break her. The hallway outside the classroom was a blur of voices and movement, but Jada's mind was elsewhere. She could feel the fire inside her rising, burning away the doubt that had crept into her soul. This recital was her chance to show Mr. Evans, and the rest of the school, that she was more than the expectations they had placed on her. "I'll prove him wrong," she thought to herself. "I'll show them all what I can do." Jada walked through the halls of Eastbrook High with a sense of determination, her steps quick and purposeful. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had always been the underdog, the girl who wasn't expected to succeed, the girl who had to fight for everything she earned. But that had never stopped her before. She had been underestimated her entire life, and she wasn't about to let it hold her back now. When she got home, the house was quiet. Her mom, Tasha, was working late at the diner, and her older brother, Marcus, was at band practice. Jada slipped off her shoes and walked to the piano in the living room. The keys were cool under her fingers as she sat down. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The song she had chosen for the recital was a piece by Chopin, one of her favorites. But she wasn't just going to play it like everyone else. She was going to bring something new to it, something that was hers alone. Jada began to play, her fingers moving with purpose across the keys, each note deliberate, each movement precise. The music poured from her, filling the room with a sense of quiet intensity. This was her sanctuary, her place of peace. As she played, she could feel the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders, even if only for a moment. But soon, the doubts crept back in. What if he's right? What if I'm not good enough? The thought lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. Jada stopped playing and stared at the piano for a moment, her fingers resting on the keys. She had worked so hard for this moment, for this opportunity. She wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her, not Mr. Evans, not anyone. I'll show him, she thought, her resolve hardening. I'll prove I'm worthy. I'll make them all see me for who I truly am. She sat up straighter and resumed playing, her fingers dancing across the keys with renewed confidence. This recital would be her moment to shine. And no one, not even Mr. Evans, was going to take that from her. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jada Johnson's love for music was born long before she set foot in a classroom or sat behind a piano. It was in the hum of her mother's lullabies, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and the pulse of the music that filled their small apartment in the heart of the city. Her earliest memories were of her mother, Tasha, singing softly to her as she rocked her to sleep at night. Tasha wasn't a professional singer, but her voice had a warmth to it that wrapped around Jada like a comforting blanket. "You've got the music in your soul, baby," her mom would say, her voice full of tenderness. "I can see it in your eyes." Jada's love for music didn't come from any one place, it came from everything around her. She had inherited her musical ability from both sides of her family, though it wasn't always something that was nurtured. Her father, who had left when she was just a baby, was a musician too, a jazz guitarist who could fill a room with the soulful strums of his instrument. But he had never been there to show Jada how to play. Her mother had tried her best to give her everything, but raising two kids on her own while working double shifts at the diner didn't leave much time for music lessons. Instead, Jada learned on her own. She would sit at the old piano her mother had inherited from a friend, her small fingers trying to mimic the music that played in her heart. There was something about the sound of the piano, something pure and powerful, that made her feel connected to everything around her. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling stories, expressing emotions that words couldn't quite capture. Jada's older brother, Marcus, shared her love for music. He played the drums in a local band and had dreams of becoming a professional musician. Marcus was always the more outgoing of the two, always in the spotlight with his bandmates, always the one to stand up and claim his space. Jada, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. She preferred the solitude of her piano, where she could express herself without having to speak a word. When Jada was 9, Marcus had a huge break. A record producer came to one of his band's performances and offered them a deal. It was the beginning of something big for him. Jada watched from the sidelines as Marcus went on to perform at local clubs, his name slowly becoming known in the music scene. But despite his success, Jada always felt a pang of jealousy. It wasn't because she didn't love her brother or want the best for him, it was because she knew deep down that her own dreams of becoming a musician were just as valid. But as much as she wanted to follow her passion, Jada also understood that her path wouldn't be an easy one. She was a black girl in a world that often told her that people like her didn't belong in spaces of classical music or higher education. The barriers were invisible but very real. There were the looks she got when she stepped into the music store, the whispering classmates who didn't think she could play anything but hip-hop, and the subtle ways teachers like Mr. Evans placed her in lower-level music classes. Despite all of this, Jada kept playing. She had to. Music was more than just something she did, it was a lifeline, a connection to something greater than herself. Her mother, Tasha, worked tirelessly to make sure Jada and Marcus had a chance at a better life, though it was clear the odds were stacked against them. Tasha had dropped out of high school to have Marcus and then Jada, and she had never looked back. The long hours at the diner kept her on her feet, but it was the bills and rent that kept her mind occupied. There wasn't much room for personal dreams, but she never let Jada feel that way. Tasha always told her to keep dreaming, to keep reaching for something better. "I know things aren't always easy, Jada," Tasha would say late at night when Jada was practicing in the living room, "but don't ever let anyone tell you you're not good enough. You've got the music in you. And that's more powerful than anything." But Jada had learned over the years that her mother's words, while comforting, couldn't shield her from the harsh realities of the world. At school, Jada faced the weight of being one of the few black students in a largely white institution. It wasn't the blatant racism that hurt the most, it was the subtle, everyday dismissals. The moments when people just didn't see her, or worse, when they assumed she couldn't be good enough. She had been to auditions before, where the looks from judges made her feel like she had to work twice as hard just to be considered. She had learned that in the world of classical music, her skin color was a disadvantage. It was a silent barrier that no one had ever said outright, but it was there in the way the instructors looked past her, in the way they always gave her the easier pieces to play. And then there was Mr. Evans. Mr. Evans was the kind of teacher who believed in tradition. He believed in excellence, in perfect technique, in playing things the right way. But he didn't believe in Jada. He had never given her a fair chance. He had placed her in the lower group from the beginning, despite her natural talent and hard work. She had tried to talk to him, tried to explain that she wanted to do more, to push herself, but it had always been the same response: "Just focus on the basics for now, Jada. Maybe next time." That's when Jada realized that proving herself to Mr. Evans wouldn't be easy. She would have to fight for every inch of respect, for every note she played. But the question was, could she make it in a world that seemed to already have its mind made up about her? The answer wasn't clear yet. But as Jada sat down at the piano that evening, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to give up. For the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her mother's words pushing her forward. She wasn't going to just sit back and let the world dictate her worth. No, this time, she was going to show them what she was made of. And it all started with that recital. The days leading up to the recital were a blur for Jada. Every spare moment she had was spent practicing, her fingers flying over the keys, each note a reminder of the challenge ahead. She had chosen the Nocturne in E-flat major by Chopin, a piece that had haunted her dreams since she first heard it as a child. There was something about the way the melody wove in and out, the way it could carry you from melancholy to hope in a matter of seconds. It felt like her story, a journey of struggle, but also of resilience and grace. But the closer the recital came, the more Jada felt herself slipping. Mr. Evans had been watching her closely in class. Every time she played, he had a critical eye on her form, her posture, the way her fingers touched the keys. It was as though he was waiting for her to fail, waiting to see if she'd make a mistake, waiting to confirm his belief that she wasn't ready for this level of performance. Jada hated that feeling. It was like every note she played was an audition to prove him wrong, and she couldn't afford to make a single misstep. "Jada," Mr. Evans called one day as the class was finishing up, his voice stern and condescending. "I know you're practicing hard, but I have to say, I still don't think you're quite ready for a piece like this. It's very advanced. Maybe next time, you should pick something a little simpler. Just to avoid any mistakes." His words cut deeper than she expected. The other students glanced at each other, a few of them whispering, probably wondering if she'd be able to pull it off. Her hands froze over the keys. Jada forced a smile, though inside she was burning with frustration. "I'll manage, Mr. Evans," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I know what I'm doing." He gave a dismissive nod and turned away to talk to a couple of students who were struggling with their pieces. But Jada couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just doubting her piano skills, he was doubting her as a person. The weeks that followed were filled with long nights of practice, hours spent refining every note, every crescendo, every pause in the music. Her fingers ached from playing for so long, but she refused to stop. The thought of Mr. Evans' skepticism pushed her forward, propelling her through the exhaustion. But it wasn't just Mr. Evans' disbelief that was weighing on her. It was the tension in the air around her, the quiet whispers from classmates who didn't think she belonged there in the first place. Even though no one ever said it outright, it was clear that Jada felt out of place in a space where classical music and tradition often excluded people like her. She could hear them, those soft, judgmental whispers from her peers, those who assumed she'd only be good at pop music or jazz. She'd heard it all before, and yet, every time it happened, it stung a little more. One day, after another long class, Jada was packing up her things when she overheard a conversation between two students from the higher-level piano class. "Did you hear about Jada?" one of them said. "She's doing the recital, but I don't know. I can't picture her playing something like that. I mean, it's Chopin. That's not really her style, right?" "I heard she's not even supposed to be in the advanced group," the other student replied. "Mr. Evans said she's in the lower group for a reason. I don't think she'll last long. I wouldn't be surprised if she messes it up." Jada felt the blood rush to her face. She wanted to confront them, to stand up for herself, but the words felt trapped in her throat. What could she say? They were right. Mr. Evans didn't believe in her, and now it seemed like no one else did either. Jada stood frozen, staring at the door of the classroom. The whispers echoed in her ears, and for the first time in a long time, she felt utterly alone. She wanted to walk out, to leave, to forget the whole thing and go back to the safety of her room and her piano. But then she thought of her mom. She thought of her mom's tireless efforts, of her own dreams, of the music that had always been there for her. She thought of Marcus, who had worked so hard to chase his dreams, no matter the odds. She couldn't back down now. The next day, as the tension in the room grew thicker with every passing moment, Mr. Evans made another announcement. "All right, everyone, the order of performances has been decided. Jada," he said, his gaze barely meeting hers. "You'll be performing second to last. That should give you enough time to warm up." Jada's heart sank. Second to last. That meant Mr. Evans had already decided where she fit. The second-to-last slot was the one reserved for someone who was still considered a work in progress, someone who might stumble but would hopefully pull it together by the end. He had already written her off, and she knew it. She walked back to her seat, trying to keep her expression neutral. But inside, she was seething. She wasn't just mad at Mr. Evans anymore, she was mad at the whole system. Mad at the idea that she had to prove herself every step of the way. Mad at the way her talent was always questioned, always minimized. This isn't how it's supposed to be, she thought. This isn't how it's going to end. Later that night, as she sat at the piano, her fingers lightly brushed over the keys, lost in the rhythm of the piece. She thought about the recital again, how Mr. Evans was already setting her up to fail. But something in her wouldn't let that happen. She had been underestimated for too long, and she was done playing by their rules. "I won't let them decide my worth," she muttered to herself. The music flowed from her like a surge of energy, a determination to prove everyone wrong, starting with herself. She was going to show them all, Mr. Evans, her classmates, even the whispers that haunted her, that she was more than they thought she could be. The recital was just the beginning. And Jada was ready to take her place, not as someone who was overlooked, but as someone who had finally found her voice. The night before the recital, Jada couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her bed, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. The quiet of the house was only interrupted by the occasional rustle of her sheets as she fidgeted, trying to find some peace. Tomorrow was the day. The moment she had been working towards for so long, the moment she would finally get to show everyone what she could do. She had practiced tirelessly for this, putting in hours at the piano until her fingers ached and her body screamed for rest. But none of it seemed to quiet the nervousness that knotted her stomach. Jada had always been confident in her abilities, but this recital felt different. This wasn't just a performance. It was a chance to prove herself to everyone, to show them that she belonged in the world of classical music, despite what Mr. Evans thought, despite the whispers from her peers, despite every doubt she'd ever faced. She stared at the clock, watching the minutes tick by slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. Her mom had tried to comfort her earlier that evening, telling her everything would be fine. Just remember, Jada, it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about sharing your music. Let the music speak for itself. But no matter how many times her mom said it, Jada couldn't shake the feeling that she was fighting for something bigger than just a good performance. She was fighting to be seen. Tomorrow will be my moment, she thought, clenching her fists at her sides. No matter what. The recital was being held in the school's large auditorium, and as Jada entered the building the next afternoon, the overwhelming sense of anticipation made her stomach flip. She could hear the muffled sounds of people talking, the rustling of programs, and the hum of excitement. Jada kept her head down, trying to avoid the crowd as she made her way to the backstage area. When she arrived, she found the rest of the performers already warming up. Some of the students were rehearsing their pieces with ease, their confidence radiating. Others, like Jada, were pacing nervously, glancing at their sheet music as though it were the only thing that could keep them grounded. As Jada stood there, waiting her turn, she overheard one of the students from the higher group, Sarah, talking with a few of her friends. "Jada's playing Chopin?" "Oh, I didn't know she was that serious about the recital," Sarah said with a laugh. "I guess we'll see if she can actually pull it off." The other students nodded in agreement, their eyes flicking toward Jada as though waiting for her to mess up. Jada's face flushed, but she refused to let them see how much their words affected her. She couldn't let them get to her now, not when she was so close to showing everyone her true potential. A few minutes later, Mr. Evans arrived backstage, clipboard in hand, looking at his students with that same critical eye he always had. When his gaze landed on Jada, he didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge her beyond a simple nod. "All right, everyone, line up," he called, his voice cool and authoritative. "Jada, you're up second to last. Get ready." Jada nodded silently, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words from earlier that week still hanging in the air. Second to last. It felt like an afterthought, like she was being set up to fail, placed in the second-to-last position just in case she didn't meet his expectations. But this wasn't about him. This wasn't about proving anything to Mr. Evans or anyone else. This was her time, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Her turn came far too quickly, and before she knew it, she was walking onto the stage, the bright lights shining down on her, blinding her for a moment. The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. She could hear her own breath, shallow and quick. But she steadied herself. She was going to do this. Jada sat at the grand piano in the center of the stage, her fingers resting on the cool ivory keys. The crowd was waiting, the air thick with expectation. Her heart raced, but she breathed deeply, closing her eyes for a moment to collect her thoughts. This is it, she thought, the weight of everything crashing down on her. Show them who you are, Jada. Let the music speak for you. Her fingers touched the keys, and as the first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air, Jada lost herself in the music. The notes flowed from her like a river, each one a reflection of the turmoil and the hope she had carried within her for so long. At first, she felt the nervousness that had consumed her begin to slip away. The melody wrapped around her like a shield, a force that kept the world at bay. She played with everything she had, the struggle, the pain, the triumph. Each note was a story, and Jada's heart poured into the music. The audience was still, hanging on every note, but as the performance went on, Jada could sense their shift in perception. She wasn't just playing music, she was telling a story that resonated with everyone in the room. It wasn't just technical mastery, it was raw emotion, the kind of emotion that came from the soul. The piece built to its crescendo, and Jada's fingers moved faster, more urgently, as though she was racing against time. And then, just as suddenly, she pulled back, the final notes echoing softly in the quiet auditorium. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then, slowly, the applause began. It was soft at first, a tentative clap from a few people. But then it grew louder, and the sound of clapping filled the air, filling Jada with a sense of relief and joy she hadn't expected. She opened her eyes, realizing she hadn't even been aware of her own movements, lost entirely in the music. She had done it. She had shown them what she was capable of. As she stood up from the piano and walked off the stage, her heart still pounding with adrenaline, she caught Mr. Evans' gaze from across the room. For the first time, there was no criticism in his eyes. There was something else. Something like respect. The applause continued, but Jada barely noticed it. She was too busy holding her head high, walking with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. The battle wasn't over yet, but this was a victory. And she was ready for whatever came next. The days following the recital were a whirlwind. Jada felt like she was walking on air. Her performance had exceeded even her own expectations. The applause still echoed in her mind, a sweet reminder of the power she had just unleashed through her music. She couldn't help but smile whenever she thought back to the moment she finished, the final note hanging in the air before the audience erupted into applause. Yet, amid the joy of her success, there was a lingering question in her mind: had she finally earned the respect she so desperately wanted from Mr. Evans? The day after the recital, Jada entered the music classroom with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. She had rehearsed her piece countless times, but now that it was over, she was left wondering what came next. Would Mr. Evans acknowledge her, or would it all just be brushed aside like every other time she had proven herself? As she entered the room, her eyes immediately found him. Mr. Evans was at his desk, flipping through some papers with a furrowed brow, oblivious to her presence. Jada hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, but then her determination kicked in. "Mr. Evans," she called out, her voice steady. He looked up, and for a brief moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Was it surprise? Maybe even respect. "Jada," he said, his tone softer than usual. "You played beautifully. I'll admit, I didn't expect it. But you were exceptional." Jada felt a lump form in her throat. It was exactly what she had hoped to hear, yet hearing it from him felt different than she had imagined. She had always yearned for validation from him, but now, in this moment, she realized it didn't matter as much as she thought. She had already proven it to herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "That means a lot." He nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You've earned your place in this class, Jada. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." His words were powerful, but as Jada looked into his eyes, she could see something else, something almost vulnerable. Had Mr. Evans been battling his own insecurities all this time? Had he, too, been fighting to prove something to others? It was a thought she had never entertained before, and it gave her a strange sense of understanding. Before she could say anything else, Mr. Evans stood up and walked toward her. "You should know, Jada, you're one of the most talented students I've ever taught. Keep pushing yourself. And don't ever let doubt stop you." Jada's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't just offering praise for her performance, he was acknowledging her as an artist, as someone who belonged in the world of classical music. As she left the classroom, Jada's mind was buzzing. She had always known she had something special within her, but now she had the validation she needed, not from Mr. Evans or anyone else, but from herself. She had earned this moment. And more importantly, she had learned to believe in herself. But just as she was about to leave the building, a familiar voice called out to her. "Hey, Jada." It was Sarah, one of the students from the higher-level class. She was standing by the door with a few of her friends, who were all watching Jada with a new curiosity. Jada felt a wave of tension wash over her. She didn't know if Sarah was coming over to apologize, or if she was going to brush her off like everyone else. But when Sarah walked up to her, it wasn't what Jada had expected. "Listen," Sarah said, her tone more earnest than usual. "I just wanted to say, you were amazing last night. I honestly didn't think you had it in you, but you," she stopped herself, as though searching for the right words. "You really proved me wrong. You deserve all the praise you're getting." Jada blinked, momentarily taken aback. She had never expected this kind of acknowledgement from Sarah, especially not after the way she had overheard her talking earlier. "Thank you," Jada said, her voice quiet. "That means a lot." Sarah smiled, a little awkwardly. "I think I misjudged you. You really belong in the advanced group, and I was wrong to doubt you. I'm sorry." Jada nodded, feeling a small weight lift off her shoulders. In that moment, something shifted. Sarah's apology wasn't something she had been waiting for, but it was still meaningful. It was a recognition that Jada had earned, and one that she hadn't expected to come from the very people who had doubted her the most. As she walked out of the building, her footsteps felt lighter. It wasn't just the acknowledgement from Mr. Evans or Sarah. It was the realization that she had taken control of her own story. She had faced the doubts, the judgment, the fears, and had emerged victorious. Jada had always known that music was her way to express herself, but now she understood that her talent was not something anyone could deny. It wasn't about what others believed about her, it was about what she believed in herself. Later that evening, Jada sat at her piano, her fingers dancing over the keys with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Each note that rang out was a reminder of how far she had come. She was no longer the girl who had been underestimated or overlooked. She was an artist, ready to carve her own path in the world of music. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jada knew that she was ready for whatever challenges lay in her future. She had found her voice, and no one could take that away from her. The following weeks were a blur for Jada. As the recital faded into the background, she focused on her practice, determined to continue improving. Her classmates and even a few teachers now looked at her with a new respect, and Jada could feel the difference in the way she was treated. She no longer had to fight to be noticed, her talent had done the talking. But with this newfound attention came a sense of pressure that weighed heavily on her shoulders. As much as she had craved recognition, the expectations that came with it were suffocating. The whispers of admiration around her were loud, and with each compliment, Jada felt the increasing weight of responsibility to perform better than before. Mr. Evans continued to offer his feedback, his once cold demeanor replaced with a surprising amount of praise. He was still as meticulous as ever, critiquing the smallest details of her technique, but now there was a subtle shift in his approach. He didn't just see Jada as a student who had potential, he saw her as someone who had the ability to change the trajectory of her life. "Jada, your performance last month was one of the best I've seen in years," he said during a private lesson, his voice uncharacteristically warm. "But the road ahead is going to be harder than you think. Talent alone won't be enough. You need discipline, perseverance, and a willingness to keep going even when the world seems determined to break you down." His words hit Jada harder than she expected. She had always believed that as long as she was good enough, everything would fall into place. But now, she understood that the path to success wasn't just about being talented, it was about enduring, about pushing through when things got tough, and about being ready for the challenges that lay ahead. After that lesson, Jada felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was more determined than ever to prove that she was capable of anything, even if it meant facing obstacles that seemed insurmountable. However, her resolve was soon tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. One Friday afternoon, as Jada was leaving class, she was approached by a familiar face, Mia, one of the girls who had often been part of the group that had doubted her. Mia was standing by her locker, her arms crossed, a hesitant look on her face. "Hey, Jada," Mia said, her voice unsure. "Can we talk for a second?" Jada raised an eyebrow. She wasn't used to people seeking her out unless they were offering praise or criticism about her performance. "Sure, what's up?" I just wanted to apologize," Mia said, her voice quiet but earnest. "I know I wasn't exactly kind to you before. I said some things, and I regret it now. You're incredible, and I was too caught up in my own stuff to see it. You've earned everything you've gotten, and I'm sorry for not supporting you earlier." Jada stood frozen for a moment, processing what Mia had said. It wasn't the apology she had been expecting, but it was real, and for the first time, Jada realized that maybe this was what she had needed all along. Not the validation from others, but the understanding that her success was her own. "It's okay, Mia," Jada said, her voice calm. "I understand. People sometimes say things they don't mean. But what matters now is that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Mia nodded, a grateful smile spreading across her face. "I'm proud of you, Jada. I really am." Jada gave her a small smile in return, but as Mia walked away, a sense of unease settled in her stomach. Was the world truly beginning to accept her, or was she simply standing at the edge of something even more complicated? The answer came sooner than she expected. A few days later, during a regular school assembly, the principal made an unexpected announcement. "As part of our school's commitment to supporting our most talented students, we are pleased to offer a scholarship opportunity to the winner of this year's regional piano competition. This scholarship will provide not only financial support but also mentorship from renowned musicians in the classical music world." The room buzzed with excitement as students whispered among themselves, their eyes immediately turning toward Jada. She could feel the weight of their gazes, some filled with awe, others with envy. But it was Mr. Evans' voice that cut through the noise, as he stood up and addressed the room. "Jada, I believe you have the potential to be a strong contender for this scholarship," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "You've already demonstrated a level of skill and artistry that sets you apart from your peers." Jada felt a mixture of pride and anxiety wash over her. The scholarship was an incredible opportunity, but the pressure it added to her already heavy shoulders was undeniable. Could she really handle the pressure of competition at such a high level? What if she failed? The following days were filled with constant practice, with Jada pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion. She practiced for hours, each day blending into the next as she tried to perfect her piece for the competition. But as the days went on, something began to shift inside her. The pressure that had initially driven her to practice harder and better started to suffocate her, and for the first time, Jada questioned whether she was truly ready for the challenge ahead. The tension began to grow within her, as if everything she had worked for was hanging by a thread, just waiting to unravel. The scholarship was no longer a dream, it was an expectation. An expectation she wasn't sure she could meet. Late one night, as Jada sat at the piano in her bedroom, her fingers stumbling over the keys, she let out a frustrated sigh. Her mind felt clouded, her heart heavy. The notes no longer felt like an expression of her soul, but a barrier she couldn't cross. She ran a hand through her hair and stared at the sheet music in front of her. She had come so far. She couldn't back down now. But could she? In that moment, Jada realized that she wasn't just competing for a scholarship or for recognition from Mr. Evans, she was competing for herself. And the only way to truly win was to believe in her ability to rise above the fear that was starting to take hold. Taking a deep breath, she placed her fingers back on the keys. "I can do this," she thought, letting the music fill the room once again. The days leading up to the regional piano competition felt like a blur to Jada. She was engulfed in the challenge of perfecting her performance, trying to balance the increasing pressure with the unwavering drive to prove herself. Every day, she spent hours at the piano, playing and replaying her piece until her fingers ached. But no matter how many times she played, the nagging voice in her head grew louder, questioning whether she was truly ready. She knew the stakes. The scholarship was not just an opportunity, it was the key to her future, a chance to break free from the confines of her current world and step into something greater. It could change her life, open doors she'd always dreamed of, and set her on a path toward becoming the pianist she had always longed to be. But with that, came the weight of her own self-doubt. It wasn't just the music that was a challenge, it was the fear of failure, the worry that she wasn't enough. What if she wasn't good enough? What if someone else, someone more polished, more practiced, took the prize instead? Her mind raced as the competition approached, and despite all the praise she had received from Mr. Evans and her peers, she felt increasingly isolated. The once supportive environment around her now seemed like a constant reminder of what was at stake. The compliments, the expectations, they all felt heavy now. One afternoon, as Jada sat in the school's music room during lunch, running through her piece one more time, Sarah came in, looking hesitant. Jada barely looked up, so engrossed in the keys, but Sarah's presence in the room was hard to ignore. "Hey, Jada," Sarah said, her voice softer than usual. "Can we talk for a second?" Jada paused mid-play, glancing at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Sure. What's up?" "I know we've had our differences in the past," Sarah began, "but I wanted to say. I've been thinking about what you said at the recital. About not needing other people's approval to be good enough. And I guess I just wanted to apologize for not seeing that earlier." Jada blinked, processing Sarah's words. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a recognition of the struggle Jada had gone through, and that mattered. "I appreciate that," Jada said quietly, returning her focus to the keys. "It's okay. We all have our moments, right?" Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Right. But I think you should know, you're not alone in this competition. You have people rooting for you, even if it doesn't always feel that way. I don't know what's going on inside your head, but I just wanted you to know that you've got this." Jada looked up at Sarah, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. There was a moment of silence between them before Jada responded, her voice steady. "Thanks, Sarah. I needed to hear that." Sarah gave a small, encouraging smile before walking out of the room, leaving Jada with a sense of relief she hadn't expected. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, someone understood the weight of the burden she was carrying. Jada turned back to the piano, her fingers moving over the keys again. But this time, there was a new sense of determination in her. She wasn't just playing to win anymore. She was playing for herself, for her future, for her dreams, and for the girl who had once been underestimated. The competition was just a few days away, and the pressure was starting to feel unbearable. Jada's usual routine of practice, school, and rest had been replaced with sleepless nights and self-imposed isolation. She knew what was at stake, but what she hadn't realized was that in all of her striving, she had lost sight of why she started playing in the first place. It wasn't about proving herself to others, it was about the music, the expression, and the way it made her feel alive. That night, as she sat at the piano, Jada allowed herself to let go of the pressure. She closed her eyes and let the music take over. She played with emotion, with passion, and with the understanding that the outcome of the competition wasn't the most important thing. What mattered was that she had poured everything she had into this moment, into the music that had always been her greatest form of expression. The next day, as Jada stood backstage at the competition, waiting for her turn to perform, she was surrounded by students from all over the region, many of whom had years of experience, polished performances, and unwavering confidence. Jada felt small in the sea of talent, but she was determined not to let her nerves consume her. "Jada Johnson," the announcer called, and her heart skipped a beat. With a deep breath, Jada walked onto the stage, the bright lights almost blinding her as she sat at the grand piano. The audience fell silent, and for a moment, everything felt like it was in slow motion. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but instead of feeling intimidated, she embraced it. This was her moment, not just to prove her talent, but to show the world who she was, what she was capable of. As her fingers touched the keys, a sense of calm washed over her. She was no longer thinking about the competition, about the pressure, or about what others thought. She was simply playing. She was letting the music flow through her, letting every note tell the story of her journey, her struggles, her triumphs, and the person she had become in the process. The audience watched in rapt attention as Jada's performance unfolded, a beautiful blend of technical mastery and raw emotion. For the first time in weeks, she felt free. When the last note lingered in the air and the room erupted into applause, Jada closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She had done it. Not for anyone else, but for herself. As she stood up and left the stage, her heart was pounding with excitement and relief. She didn't know what the judges would decide, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't care. She had given everything she had, and that was enough. The road ahead was still uncertain, but in that moment, Jada realized that she had already won. She had found her confidence, her voice, and her purpose. The days after Jada's performance were a whirlwind of uncertainty. As she walked out of the competition venue, she could feel her heart racing, unsure of what the judges would decide. She had put everything into that performance, but the overwhelming fear of not measuring up to others crept in again. Even with the applause still ringing in her ears, she couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that it might not be enough. The regional competition had been tough. There were students with years of practice, impeccable technique, and flawless performances. Jada knew she had done her best, but she couldn't help but wonder, was her best enough to stand out in a crowd of such talent? The doubt lingered, even though she tried to push it aside. The following week passed in a haze. Jada threw herself back into her routine, focusing on schoolwork and her daily practice, but she couldn't shake the nervous energy that buzzed beneath the surface. She had always been able to drown out her worries with music, but this time, no amount of piano playing seemed to ease her mind. It wasn't until a Friday afternoon, nearly a week after the competition, that the results were finally posted. The moment Jada saw the notice on the school's bulletin board, her stomach dropped. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the page before her. There were so many names, so many talented students, but her own name was conspicuously absent from the list of winners. A part of her had expected it, but the sting of disappointment hit harder than she could have imagined. She walked away from the bulletin board, her heart sinking with every step. Despite everything she had done, despite how much she had poured into her performance, it wasn't enough. As Jada wandered the hallways of the school, the weight of failure hung heavy on her shoulders. She had come so close to the scholarship, to a future that could change everything, but now it seemed like that future was slipping away. But as she made her way out of the building, she saw Mr. Evans standing near the entrance, looking at her with a mixture of concern and understanding. "Jada," he called, his voice gentle but firm. "Can we talk for a moment?" Jada didn't want to, not right then, but something about the way he said her name made her stop and turn toward him. She walked slowly toward him, keeping her head down, unsure of what to say. "Don't worry about the results," Mr. Evans said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You did something extraordinary up there. I saw it. And the judges saw it, too." Jada felt a knot tighten in her chest. "But I didn't win. I didn't even get a mention." "I know," Mr. Evans said, nodding slowly. "But sometimes, the results aren't the most important part. What matters is that you took the stage and gave everything you had. You didn't just perform, you transformed. The judges may not have recognized that, but I did. And more importantly, you did." Jada looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and frustration. "But I wanted it so badly, Mr. Evans. This was my chance to prove I'm good enough. To prove I can do this, that I belong." "You already proved that, Jada," he said, his tone softening. "You proved it the moment you stepped onto that stage. The music was you, raw, unfiltered, and real. That's something no competition can take away. You have something that can't be judged by scores or rankings. You have something that transcends all of that." Jada swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "But it's not enough if the world doesn't see it. If they don't acknowledge it." "Maybe not right now," Mr. Evans said, giving her a knowing look. "But the world will see it eventually. It always does. Talent like yours doesn't go unnoticed. You just have to keep going, keep growing, keep believing in yourself. What matters is that you believe in yourself, no matter what anyone else says." Jada stood in silence, taking in his words. Deep down, she knew he was right. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. The scholarship was supposed to be the validation, the recognition she had worked so hard for. Without it, she was left wondering if all her efforts had been in vain. "Thanks, Mr. Evans," Jada said softly, though she wasn't sure if she believed what she was saying. The weight of her emotions was too much to put into words. "You'll get there," he said, his voice full of confidence. "This isn't the end. It's just one moment, one chapter in a much bigger story. Don't let this define you. You're bigger than this competition." Jada nodded slowly, trying to internalize his words. As she turned to walk away, a small flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe the competition hadn't gone the way she wanted, but that didn't mean she had failed. It meant that her journey was just beginning. And for the first time, Jada understood what Mr. Evans had meant. This was only one step, and there were so many more to take. The next few days were a time of reflection for Jada. She had spent so many years chasing validation from others, but now, for the first time, she was starting to realize that true validation had to come from within. Her performance had been a success in its own right, not because of the applause, not because of the judges, but because it had been authentic. It had been her. Jada spent the following weeks pushing herself harder in practice, but now, she was no longer focused solely on winning. She played because she loved it, because it was a part of her, and because no competition or prize could change the fact that music was her true calling. In the end, the scholarship may have slipped through her fingers, but in its place, Jada gained something far more valuable, the belief in herself that she had been searching for all along. Jada had always felt a deep connection to her music, but after the competition, something inside her shifted. Despite not securing the scholarship, a new sense of clarity washed over her. Mr. Evans' words resonated in her mind every time she sat at the piano. This isn't the end. It's just one moment. It was exactly what she needed to hear. In the weeks that followed, she approached her practice sessions with a new mindset. Instead of focusing solely on perfection, she started to focus on expression, emotion, and telling the story of each piece. She stopped comparing herself to others. Instead, she poured all of herself into the music. It wasn't about winning a prize anymore, it was about creating something beautiful, something real. One afternoon after school, Jada was in the music room practicing, completely immersed in the rhythms of a new piece she had started learning. She didn't even hear the door creak open until someone cleared their throat softly. She looked up and saw Sarah standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual. "Mind if I watch for a bit?" Jada was caught off guard. Sarah had always been a bit distant, especially after the whole competition drama. But now, here she was, standing in the doorway like she was hoping for something, though Jada wasn't entirely sure what that was. "Sure," Jada said, adjusting herself on the bench and gesturing to the empty chair by the wall. "Take a seat." Sarah walked over and sat down, crossing her arms and watching Jada intently. For a few minutes, there was nothing but the sound of Jada's piano keys filling the air. The piece was a bit more complex than what she had played during the competition, but it felt right. Her fingers moved fluidly across the keys, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, her eyes closed in concentration. Finally, after several minutes, she stopped playing, her hands resting gently on the keys. "That was amazing," Sarah said, her voice laced with awe. Jada smiled, still catching her breath. "Thanks. I've been working on it for a while now." "I can tell," Sarah said, standing up and walking closer to the piano. "It's like, you're not just playing notes anymore. You're telling a story with every touch." Jada's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected Sarah to notice something so subtle. The way she described it was exactly what Jada had been striving for, playing the music as a way of communicating, of sharing a piece of herself. "I've been trying to do that," Jada said softly. "I think I was so focused on impressing people before. But now, I'm just playing for myself." Sarah nodded, looking thoughtful. "I get that. I think I've been trying to impress people too, you know. Ever since the recital, I've been trying to live up to everyone's expectations." She paused. "But I think I've been doing it all wrong. I've been trying to play the music they want to hear, not the music that's inside me." Jada looked at Sarah, surprised. "That's kind of what I've realized too. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of perfection. But at some point, you have to trust yourself and just let the music speak for itself." Sarah smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Jada feel like they were finally on the same page. "You're right," she said. "And you know what? I think I want to start doing that too, really playing for myself." Jada's mind was still processing the unexpected conversation. She had always seen Sarah as a competitor, someone who was more focused on winning than on the music itself. But now, Sarah was talking about the same things Jada had been grappling with. It was a realization that shifted their dynamic in a way that neither of them had expected. There was no rivalry now. There was mutual understanding, respect. As the bell rang signaling the end of the school day, the two girls stood up from their chairs, and Sarah turned to Jada. "Hey," Sarah said, her tone a little more playful, "maybe we can play a duet sometime. You know, to see what happens when we actually work together instead of trying to outdo each other." Jada's eyes widened in surprise. "A duet? That's actually a pretty cool idea." Sarah laughed. "I know, right? It's just that I'm tired of competing all the time. I think it's time to start playing for the love of it, not for the awards or recognition." Jada smiled back. "You know, I think that sounds like a good plan." The two girls shared a brief, meaningful look before Sarah turned to leave. Jada sat back down at the piano, her fingers gently grazing the keys. There was a new lightness in her chest, a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Maybe Sarah wasn't so bad after all. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. The next day, as Jada practiced, she thought about how things were changing. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't consumed by the pressure of perfection. She was playing because she wanted to. She was playing to tell a story, not just for the judges, not just for the audience, but for herself. And as the weeks passed, Jada's music began to blossom in ways she hadn't expected. She played with more freedom, more joy, more emotion. Her performances, both in class and outside of it, began to reflect a level of growth and depth that she hadn't reached before. She wasn't just playing notes. She was communicating. She was finally playing for herself, and that was all she ever needed. As the school year began to wind down, Jada felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. She had found something within herself that was more powerful than any competition or performance, a sense of purpose, a deeper connection to her music that was rooted in self-expression and personal growth. It wasn't about external validation anymore. It was about honoring her own journey and the music that lived inside her. Her practice sessions were no longer filled with the same stress and pressure that they once were. Instead of pushing herself to perfect every note, Jada found herself getting lost in the melodies, letting the music flow naturally. It was liberating. The music felt like an extension of herself now, rather than something she had to mold into something it wasn't. But despite this newfound peace, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. The end-of-year recital was coming up, and Jada couldn't shake the feeling that this performance would be different. It wasn't just a recital, it was an opportunity to show the world who she had become, to share the evolution of her musical journey with everyone who had been watching her from afar. It was her chance to prove that she had grown not just as a musician, but as a person. On the day of the recital, Jada arrived early at the auditorium, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. This time, though, it wasn't the same nervousness that had plagued her before. She wasn't concerned about being judged or compared to others. She had already done the work, and now it was time to show up, to share the music she had come to love. The auditorium was buzzing with activity as students warmed up, teachers arranged last-minute details, and parents chatted with one another. Jada felt a sense of camaraderie as she watched her peers prepare. It was a far cry from the tension and rivalry that had filled the competition just a few weeks ago. This was a celebration, a chance to enjoy the music for what it was. As she made her way to the backstage area, she bumped into Sarah, who was standing by the piano, checking her sheet music one last time. "Hey," Sarah said, giving Jada a smile. "Ready to go out there and show them what you've got?" Jada nodded, returning the smile. "I think so. But honestly, I'm more excited to just play than anything else." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's a first. You've always been about the perfect performance." Jada shrugged, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Yeah, well, I've realized it's not about perfection anymore. It's about the feeling. I just want to let it all out." "You're gonna do great," Sarah said, placing a hand on her shoulder before walking off to the stage. Jada took a deep breath, her heart still racing, but now with excitement rather than fear. It was her turn to play, to show everyone the musician she had become. The transformation had been subtle, but it had been there all along, unfolding over time. When her name was called, Jada walked confidently onto the stage. The spotlight hit her as she sat down at the grand piano, and the audience fell silent. This wasn't a competition. There were no judges, no scores to be given. There was just the music, and Jada was ready to share it with the world. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft hum of the piano fill her senses. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, and then, without thinking about the pressure or the expectation, she began to play. The piece was one she had been working on for weeks, a beautiful, haunting melody that flowed effortlessly from her fingertips. As the notes filled the auditorium, Jada's nerves seemed to melt away. She was lost in the music, in the emotion it brought out in her. Every chord, every note told a story, one that she had been waiting to share. It was a story of growth, of change, of accepting herself for who she was, flaws and all. Her playing was fluid, expressive, and raw. There was no fear anymore, no need to impress anyone. She was simply playing, for herself and for the people who cared to listen. The audience was enraptured, hanging on every note as if they could feel her transformation through the music. As Jada reached the final chord, a sense of peace washed over her. The music lingered in the air, and for the first time, she allowed herself to bask in the moment, letting the applause wash over her with a quiet smile. It wasn't about the applause, though. It was about the journey she had taken to get here. It was about the person she had become, and how far she had come since that first, uncertain moment she had stepped on stage for the competition. When the performance ended, Jada stood and gave a small, humble bow, her heart still racing, but now with a sense of fulfillment. She knew that, regardless of the outcome, she had given everything she had, and that was more than enough. Backstage, she was met by Mr. Evans, who clapped his hands together with a grin on his face. Now that, he said, was a performance. I'm so proud of you, Jada. You've come so far. Thanks, Mr. Evans, she replied, her voice full of gratitude. I feel like I've finally found what I've been looking for. He smiled warmly. And I'm sure the rest of the world will find it, too. Keep playing for yourself, Jada. You're doing something special. As Jada stepped out of the auditorium, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The future still seemed uncertain, but for the first time, she was okay with that. She didn't need to have everything figured out. She just needed to keep playing. And as long as she stayed true to herself, everything else would fall into place. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The weeks after the recital flew by in a blur of excitement and reflection. Jada felt a profound sense of fulfillment, like the music she had shared had unlocked a door to something bigger than herself. But even as she basked in the warmth of the applause and the personal growth she had experienced, there was an undeniable feeling that this was only the beginning. Jada had crossed an important threshold, but her journey was far from over. She had stepped into a new phase of her life, one where she no longer sought external validation, but instead sought personal authenticity. One afternoon, as the school year neared its end, Jada sat at the piano in the practice room, her fingers lightly tracing the keys. She had become so comfortable with the music, it felt like breathing. There was no longer any tension in her playing, no need to impress or prove herself. It was liberating. Just as she began to lose herself in a new piece she had been learning, the door to the practice room opened, and Mr. Evans stepped in, a familiar smile on his face. You've been practicing a lot lately, haven't you? Mr. Evans said, leaning against the doorframe. Jada looked up, her hands still resting on the keys. Yeah, I guess I've been really into it lately. I feel different. Like, the music's coming from somewhere deeper now. It feels more like me. Mr. Evans nodded, walking into the room and sitting on the bench beside her. I've noticed. You've grown so much over the past few months. You're no longer just playing to impress. You're playing because it's in you. And that's what makes all the difference. Jada smiled, but her eyes held a hint of uncertainty. But, what now? The recital's over, and I didn't even win that scholarship I wanted. I feel like I've crossed a big milestone, but I don't know where it's leading. Mr. Evans looked at her thoughtfully, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and wisdom. You know, Jada, sometimes the journey is less about the destination and more about the growth you experience along the way. What you're doing now, playing for yourself, not for anyone else, is what makes you unique. That's what makes your music stand out. So don't worry about what's next. Just keep following this path, and I'm sure opportunities will come. The right ones will find you. Jada's mind raced as she absorbed Mr. Evans' words. What he said made sense. She had been so focused on the idea of winning, of proving something, that she had forgotten to look at the bigger picture. Music had always been her passion, but it had always been tied up with expectations. Now, she was free of that. She was learning to play from her heart, to share her emotions with the world without fear. I guess I'm ready for whatever comes next, Jada said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. I'm just going to keep playing and see where it takes me. Mr. Evans smiled warmly. That's the spirit. Keep believing in yourself, Jada. You have something special, and the world needs to hear it. As Jada sat there, a sense of calm settled over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she didn't need to have all the answers. She just had to keep playing, keep doing what she loved, keep pushing herself to grow as a musician and as a person. The next few days passed in a haze of final exams and end-of-year activities. Despite the hectic schedule, Jada found herself practicing more than ever, pouring her heart and soul into every note. She knew that she had made it through the hardest part of her journey, overcoming her own doubts and fears. The rest, she realized, would fall into place if she stayed true to herself. Then, one afternoon, just a few days before graduation, Jada received an email that changed everything. It was from the prestigious music academy she had applied to months ago. The subject line read, "Congratulations, Jada." Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked on the email. "Dear Jada," the message began, "after careful consideration, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for admission to our upcoming summer program. Your audition video, along with your performance at the recent recital, showcased your exceptional talent and passion for music. We believe you have the potential to go far, and we are excited to offer you a spot in our program." Jada stared at the screen, unable to believe her eyes. This was it. The opportunity she had been waiting for, the opportunity she had almost given up on. And it wasn't just any opportunity, it was the chance to refine her craft, to surround herself with other musicians who shared her passion, and to take her music to the next level. Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the email again, a smile spreading across her face. The scholarship may have slipped through her fingers, but this was her next step. It was a new beginning, a chance to learn and grow, just as she had always dreamed. The day of her graduation arrived, and Jada walked across the stage with a sense of pride. She wasn't the same person who had stepped into high school all those years ago. She had changed, grown, and found her voice, not just as a musician, but as an individual. The applause was louder than she had expected, but this time, it wasn't about winning or recognition. It was about celebrating how far she had come. After the ceremony, as she stood outside with her friends and family, Jada felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she no longer felt the need to control every step. She was ready for whatever came next. With the Music Academy's acceptance in hand and the support of her loved ones behind her, Jada knew that this was just the beginning. She had always dreamed of being a great musician, and now, she realized, she was on the path to making that dream a reality. The world was waiting for her to share her story, her music, and her truth. And she was ready. Jada could hardly contain her excitement as the day of her departure to the Music Academy finally arrived. The past few months had felt like a whirlwind of change. From the self-discovery she'd found through her piano playing to the unexpected offer from the academy, everything felt like it was falling into place. She packed her bags the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited her. The uncertainty that once plagued her was now replaced with eager anticipation. As she sat in the car with her parents on the way to the airport, Jada gazed out the window, lost in thought. The academy was a dream come true, and she was determined to make the most of it. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about learning, growing, and connecting with others who shared her love for music. Her mother turned to her, breaking the silence. "Are you nervous, sweetheart?" Jada glanced at her, offering a reassuring smile. "A little, but mostly excited. I can't wait to see what it's like. This is a huge opportunity for me." Her father chimed in from the driver's seat. "We're so proud of you, Jada. No matter what happens, just remember to enjoy the journey. You've worked so hard to get here." Jada felt a swell of gratitude in her chest. Her parents had always been supportive, even when things seemed uncertain. Their faith in her had never wavered, and that belief had given her the courage to pursue her dreams. As they arrived at the airport, Jada hugged both of her parents tightly, not wanting to let go. She felt the weight of this moment, the transition from high school to the next chapter of her life, and it was both exciting and a little overwhelming. "Go and do amazing things, sweetheart," her mother said with a tearful smile. "I will, Mom," Jada replied, her voice thick with emotion. With one last hug, Jada made her way through security and to her gate, feeling the rush of independence that came with stepping into the unknown. The plane ride was long, but she spent most of it lost in her thoughts, imagining what the next few weeks at the academy would be like. When Jada finally arrived at the music academy, she was greeted by the warm, inviting campus. The buildings were grand, with a blend of classic and modern architecture that reflected the rich history of music while embracing innovation. It felt like stepping into a dream. She checked into her dormitory, a cozy room with large windows that overlooked a courtyard filled with trees and benches. The next morning, she was up early, ready to dive into the program. The academy was hosting a welcome breakfast, where she would meet the other students and get a sense of what the next few weeks would entail. Jada couldn't help but feel a little nervous as she entered the dining hall, unsure of what to expect. She scanned the room and saw groups of students already mingling, laughing, and sharing stories. There were musicians of all ages and backgrounds, all with different levels of experience and expertise. It felt like a place where talent was nurtured, and Jada was eager to see how she fit into this vibrant community. As she grabbed a plate of fruit and sat down at an empty table, she was soon joined by two other students. One of them, a tall girl with curly hair and a confident smile, introduced herself. "Hi. I'm Ava. I'm a cellist. What about you?" "I'm Jada," she replied, offering a shy smile. "I play the piano." Ava raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "A pianist, huh? You must be pretty good if you're here." Jada chuckled, feeling the usual wave of self-doubt rise, but she pushed it away. "I guess I'm still learning. But I'm excited to be here." Ava leaned in, her expression thoughtful. "That's what it's all about, right? Growing and learning. We're all here because we want to be better, and there's no better place for that than this academy." Jada nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie with this stranger. Ava seemed genuine, and Jada appreciated the encouragement. Over the next few days, Jada quickly got to know the other students in her program. Some were more experienced than she was, others less so, but everyone was passionate about music. It was an environment where competition didn't feel like a threat, it felt like a challenge to push yourself further, together. The first week of classes was intense. There were daily workshops, one-on-one lessons with world-renowned instructors, and group performances that pushed Jada's limits. But it was exactly what she needed. She was learning new techniques, refining her skills, and developing a deeper understanding of music theory. The feedback from her teachers was constructive, encouraging her to take risks and to not be afraid of making mistakes. One evening, after a particularly difficult practice session, Jada sat on the steps of the dormitory building, her fingers aching from the long hours at the piano. She was exhausted, but a part of her felt alive in a way she never had before. The academy was pushing her to grow in ways she hadn't expected, and while it was challenging, it was also exhilarating. "Hey, Jada." Ava's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You up for a walk?" Jada looked up to see Ava standing at the bottom of the steps, her cello case slung over her shoulder. She smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Yeah, I could use a break," Jada said, standing up and stretching. "Let's go." As they walked around the campus, Ava told Jada about her experiences in music, how she had studied under several different teachers and had performed with orchestras in the past. But despite her impressive credentials, Ava seemed grounded and humble, which Jada found refreshing. "I used to think I had to have it all figured out," Ava admitted, "but the more I learned, the more I realized that music is a journey, not a destination. I've learned more from the mistakes than from the successes, honestly." Jada listened intently, feeling a sense of relief. She wasn't the only one who had doubts and fears. Everyone, it seemed, was on their own path, figuring things out as they went. And the more Jada embraced the idea of growth rather than perfection, the easier it became to enjoy the process. By the end of the summer, Jada had not only improved as a pianist, but she had also learned valuable life lessons. She had made new friends, including Ava, who had become a close confidant. And most importantly, she had learned to trust herself in ways she never thought possible. When the program ended, Jada felt a mixture of sadness and excitement. She didn't want to leave, but she knew she was taking with her something priceless, a deeper understanding of herself, her music, and the endless possibilities ahead. As she boarded the plane home, Jada sat by the window, looking out at the vast sky. She didn't know exactly where her journey would take her next, but she knew that music would always be there to guide her. The fall semester of Jada's first year of college arrived quickly. After returning from the Summer Music Academy, she felt renewed and energized. Her experiences there had given her the confidence to step into a new environment, one where she was finally surrounded by like-minded individuals who shared her passion for music. Jada had always dreamed of attending a prestigious university with a strong music program, and now that she was there, she felt a sense of belonging. She had chosen to major in music performance, and the first few weeks were a whirlwind of rehearsals, theory classes, and practice sessions. Jada was eager to prove herself, not just to her professors but to herself. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now that she was here, there was a part of her that feared failing. The pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had grown used to being one of the top students at her high school, but now, surrounded by so much talent, she felt like a small fish in a big pond. There were moments when doubt crept in, moments when she questioned whether she was good enough to be there. One afternoon, Jada sat in the practice room, her fingers hovering over the piano keys. The piece she had been working on for weeks was proving more difficult than she had anticipated. She couldn't seem to get the timing right, and no matter how many times she tried, it felt like she was hitting a wall. Frustration began to mount, and she could feel the familiar wave of self-doubt creeping in. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," she muttered under her breath, slamming her hands down on the keys in frustration. The sound of the discordant notes echoed through the empty room, reminding her of how far she still had to go. Just as she was about to give up for the day, there was a knock on the door. Jada didn't have to look up to know who it was. She had become close with Ava over the summer, and now they were roommates at school. "Hey, you in there?" Ava's voice was soft but full of concern. "Yeah, just struggling a bit," Jada replied, finally looking up. "I can't seem to get this piece right. It feels like no matter what I do, I'm not good enough. I'm starting to think maybe I don't belong here after all." Ava stepped into the room, setting her cello case down beside the door. "I've seen that look before. The 'I'm not good enough' look," she said with a smile, though Jada could tell it was more than just humor. Ava was genuinely concerned. Jada let out a sigh, feeling the weight of her insecurities. This is so much harder than I thought it would be. I thought I was prepared for this, but now that I'm here, I feel like I'm falling short." Ava sat down next to her, her eyes full of understanding. "I get it. I felt the same way when I first came here. You're surrounded by people who are all incredibly talented, and it's easy to get intimidated. But you've got something they don't have, Jada. You've got heart. You play with so much emotion, so much soul. You just need to trust that." "I don't know if that's enough," Jada whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I can play, but it feels like it's never perfect. And with everything I'm learning here, I feel like I'm always falling behind." Ava leaned in, her tone serious. "No one's perfect, Jada. Not even the best of us. And the best part? No one expects you to be perfect. They just want to see you grow. You're here because they believe in your potential, not because you've already arrived. You have the talent, you just need to keep pushing through the hard moments. Trust yourself. Trust the process." Jada took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Ava's words sink in. She knew her friend was right, but it was hard to remember that when the pressure seemed so overwhelming. She had always been someone who strove for perfection, but now, she was learning that perfection wasn't the goal. Growth was. "Thanks, Ava," Jada said quietly. "I needed that." Ava gave her a reassuring smile. "Anytime. And remember, we're in this together. We've got each other's backs." Jada smiled, the weight on her chest lightening a little. She wasn't alone in this. She had friends, mentors, and a whole community of people who were rooting for her. Maybe that was the most important thing, knowing that failure wasn't a reflection of her worth, but a part of the journey. The next day, Jada returned to the piano with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't expect everything to click immediately, but she was ready to put in the work. She wasn't going to let her doubts control her anymore. She was going to trust herself and take it one step at a time. As she began to play, the familiar sound of the piano filled the room. The music still wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that was enough for now. A few weeks later, Jada received an email from one of her professors, inviting her to perform in a masterclass that would be attended by some of the most respected musicians in the industry. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also terrified her. The thought of performing in front of such an esteemed audience made her stomach churn with nerves. At first, Jada wanted to turn down the offer. She wasn't ready. She hadn't perfected the piece. What if she messed up? But then, she remembered what Ava had said, growth over perfection. With a deep breath, Jada accepted the invitation. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back. She would take this opportunity, embrace the challenge, and perform to the best of her ability. The masterclass was a pivotal moment in her journey. It wasn't about being flawless, it was about putting herself out there and sharing her passion with the world. And when she played, the music poured out of her, raw and real, filled with emotion. She was nervous, but she was also free. She had learned to embrace the imperfections, the mistakes, and the struggles along the way. By the end of the performance, Jada had earned the respect of her peers and professors, but more importantly, she had earned her own respect. She had taken a leap of faith and, in doing so, had grown stronger. And as she left the stage that day, she knew one thing for certain: she belonged here. Not because she was perfect, but because she was willing to grow. Jada sat in the dimly lit practice room, her fingers frozen above the piano keys. The masterclass had been an incredible experience, and she had learned so much from the feedback she received. But now, with a new semester underway, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. The school was hosting an annual piano competition, and the winner would receive a full scholarship for the next year. It was an opportunity that could change everything for Jada. But it also filled her with dread. The idea of competing against so many talented pianists sent a ripple of anxiety through her. She had never been one to thrive in competitive environments. Throughout her childhood, her love for music had always been about expression, not about beating someone else. But now, here, in this prestigious university, the stakes felt incredibly high. Should I even enter? Jada whispered to herself, her gaze still fixed on the piano. She had come so far since her high school days, but was she really ready for this? She had heard the whispers in the halls, students talking about the competition, about the fierce talent they had seen in previous years. It made her feel small, insignificant. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Ava. Ava, hey, I saw the sign-up sheet for the competition. You're entering, right? Jada stared at the message for a moment, her finger hovering over the reply. She could feel the pressure building inside her chest. Ava had always been confident in her, but Jada wasn't sure she had the same confidence in herself. She typed a response, her fingers hesitating on the keys. Jada, I'm not sure. I'm feeling kind of intimidated by everyone else. What if I'm not good enough? A few seconds passed before Ava's reply came through. Ava, you've got this. You're one of the most talented pianists I know. You're not just good enough, you're better than you think. This competition isn't about being perfect. It's about pushing yourself. And who knows? Maybe you'll surprise yourself. Jada read the message twice, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Ava's words had a way of cutting through her self-doubt like a hot knife through butter. She was right. The competition wasn't about perfection. It was about taking a chance. About showing what she had worked so hard for. Still, a wave of doubt clung to her. That afternoon, during one of her practice sessions, Jada was alone in the room, focused entirely on the piano. Her fingers danced across the keys, playing the same passage over and over again. The piece she had chosen for the competition was challenging, but it spoke to her heart. It was a complex piece by Chopin, elegant, emotional, yet powerful. It had always been her dream to play something so intricate, so deeply expressive. But now, the pressure of the competition was taking away some of the joy that the piece once brought her. Her fingers stumbled over the notes again. Why is this so hard? She thought, frustration bubbling up in her chest. She had been practicing for hours, and still, it wasn't coming together. The intricate passages felt like they were slipping away from her. The mistakes seemed louder than the beautiful melodies she wanted to create. Suddenly, she heard the door open, and Ava's familiar voice broke her concentration. "Hey, Jada. How's it going?" Ava asked, leaning against the doorframe. Jada turned to look at her, shaking her head. "I don't know, Ava. I'm trying to get this piece right, but it's just not happening. I feel like I'm stuck. I thought I was ready, but now it feels like I'm not." Ava smiled and walked into the room, her eyes scanning the sheet music Jada had been working on. "You're overthinking it," she said, sitting down next to her. "It's normal to have moments like this. But you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Just take a step back, breathe, and focus on the music, not the competition. You're playing for you, not for anyone else." Jada let out a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly release from her shoulders. Ava was right. She had been so focused on the competition and the idea of impressing everyone that she had forgotten why she started playing music in the first place, for herself. "I'll try," Jada said, her voice softening. Ava leaned in, her expression serious. "Jada, listen. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. What matters is that you're growing, that you're pushing your limits, and that you're enjoying the process. Don't let the fear of failure stop you from going after what you want." Jada nodded, a sense of calm beginning to wash over her. Ava's words were like a balm to her soul. She knew she had to stop comparing herself to others and focus on her own journey. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her path. Not anymore. The next few weeks leading up to the competition were a blur of practice, focus, and self-reflection. Jada spent hours each day working on her piece, each practice session bringing her closer to the performance she envisioned. It wasn't easy, there were still moments of doubt, of frustration, but she learned to push through them, to trust in herself and in the music. The night of the competition arrived, and Jada was a bundle of nerves. Her palms were sweaty as she stood backstage, waiting for her turn to perform. She could hear the other pianists warming up, their fingers dancing across the keys in perfect harmony. It made her stomach twist with anxiety, but she fought to keep her composure. When her name was called, Jada took a deep breath and walked to the stage. The spotlight felt warm on her face, and the soft hum of the piano filled the room as she took her seat. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts, and then her fingers touched the keys. The music flowed out of her, rich and emotional. She felt the piece come alive beneath her fingers, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about the competition. She wasn't thinking about the other pianists or the judges. She was just lost in the music, letting it carry her wherever it wanted to go. When the final note rang out, Jada opened her eyes to see the audience applauding. She was shaking, her heart racing, but she smiled, feeling a sense of pride that she had never experienced before. She had given it her all, and that was enough. As she walked off the stage, Ava was waiting for her, her face lighting up with excitement. "You did it, Jada. You were incredible," Ava exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. Jada laughed, still in awe of what had just happened. "I was so nervous, but I did it. I actually did it. Ava grinned. That's what matters. You did it for you. And that's what makes it so amazing. Jada smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She hadn't won the competition, but she had won something far more important, her belief in herself. The days following the piano competition were filled with mixed emotions for Jada. Though she had poured everything into her performance, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. The competition had been fierce, and while she had played her heart out, she couldn't help but wonder how her performance stacked up against the others. Her professors and peers had been kind, offering words of encouragement, but the voice of doubt lingered in her mind. Did she truly belong in this world of gifted musicians? Was she good enough to pursue her dreams? The tension that had built up over the course of the semester began to take its toll. Jada found herself withdrawing into herself more and more, spending hours alone in her practice room, trying to improve every small detail of her performance. Yet, despite all her effort, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was just spinning her wheels. She had reached a plateau. And for the first time in her life, it felt like no amount of practice could push her beyond that point. Jada, you've been here for hours. Are you going to come out for lunch? Ava's voice came from the door, breaking the silence. Jada hadn't realized how late it had gotten. I'm fine, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't hungry. She was consumed with frustration. The thought of taking a break felt like weakness. But even as she spoke, Jada knew something was wrong. She wasn't doing this because of a drive to improve anymore, she was doing it out of fear. Fear of failure. Fear of disappointing herself, her professors, and everyone who believed in her. Ava entered the room and sat next to Jada, looking at the piano. I know that look, Ava said, her voice calm but firm. You're stuck in your head again. And I get it. I really do. But you've got to take a break. You're not going to solve anything by overworking yourself. Jada sighed, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing on her. I don't know what's wrong, Ava. I've tried everything. I practiced, I listened to my recordings, and it's still not enough. I'm just, not good enough. Ava shook her head and placed a hand on Jada's arm. That's not true. You are good enough. But you're also human. You can't expect to be perfect every time. It's okay to have setbacks. It's okay to feel frustrated. What's important is that you keep going, even when things aren't working the way you want them to. Jada turned her gaze to the floor, trying to hold back the tears threatening to fall. I don't know if I can. What if I'm just not cut out for this? Ava's expression softened. You are cut out for this, Jada. You've worked so hard to get here, and you've already proven that you have the talent. But this isn't just about talent anymore. It's about perseverance. It's about fighting through the tough moments and trusting that you're on the right path. I believe in you, Jada. And I know that you've got what it takes. Jada wiped her eyes, feeling the warmth of Ava's words slowly sink in. It was hard to believe in herself when the self-doubt was so overpowering. But hearing Ava's encouragement reminded her that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do it all on her own. She had people who believed in her, and sometimes, that was all she needed to keep going. With a deep breath, Jada finally looked up. Thanks, Ava. I don't know what I'd do without you. Ava smiled, standing up and stretching. Well, you've got me, and I'm not going anywhere. Now, let's go get something to eat. You've been holed up in here long enough. Jada smiled, a small laugh escaping her lips. You're right. I think I could use a break. The next few weeks brought more practice and more doubts, but with Ava's constant encouragement, Jada began to find her rhythm again. She learned to take breaks when she needed them, to step away from the piano and refocus her mind. Slowly but surely, the cracks in her confidence began to heal, though they were still there, lurking in the background. One afternoon, after another practice session that left her feeling drained but satisfied, Jada received an unexpected email. It was from one of the competition judges. Subject: feedback from the piano competition. With a sense of both curiosity and dread, Jada opened the email. She knew this wasn't just a casual note, this was the feedback from a panel of professional musicians and critics. She felt the familiar pang of anxiety in her stomach as she clicked to read the message. Dear Jada, thank you for your participation in this year's piano competition. We were truly impressed by your performance. While you did not win this year, we would like to offer you an opportunity to perform in a special showcase event that will be held in the coming months. Your artistry and emotional depth were remarkable, and we believe you have tremendous potential as an artist. We would be honored if you would consider accepting our invitation to perform. Warm regards. Professor Samuel Cohen, Competition Judge and Music Department Chair. Jada stared at the screen, her heart racing. The message was short, but it carried a weight that she hadn't expected. The judges had noticed her, not just her technical ability, but her heart, her emotion. They believed in her. She hadn't won the competition, but this was something that mattered so much more. It was validation. It was a glimmer of hope. She felt a rush of excitement surge through her, followed quickly by a wave of gratitude. Ava was right. It wasn't about perfection. It was about taking risks, pushing through the fear, and trusting the process. The offer to perform in the showcase event felt like the universe giving her a second chance, a chance to prove that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. Without thinking, Jada hit reply, her fingers trembling as she typed. Subject: feedback from the piano competition. Dear Professor Cohen, thank you so much for the kind words and the invitation. I am truly honored to have the opportunity to perform in the showcase event. I would be thrilled to accept and share my music with you and the audience. Thank you again for your belief in me. Sincerely, Jada Thompson. As she clicked send, Jada felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited for what was to come. The days leading up to Jada's performance were a whirlwind. She had signed up for the showcase event without a second thought, but now, with the date rapidly approaching, the reality of it all began to set in. She hadn't just been invited to perform, she was going to be playing in front of an audience of influential musicians, professors, and other students, all of whom would be scrutinizing every note she played. The pressure was starting to feel overwhelming. Ava noticed the change in her friend. Jada had always been driven, but lately, she seemed more tense, more focused. The carefree energy she had once radiated now felt like a distant memory. You're going to be great, Ava said one afternoon as they sat in their usual spot in the student lounge, the sound of chatter filling the background. Jada was scrolling through sheet music on her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jada looked up, meeting Ava's gaze. I don't know, Ava. This is different. This isn't just another competition. These people, these musicians, they've been doing this their entire lives. And then there's me. I'm just Jada Thompson. I still feel like I don't belong in this world. Ava's eyes softened. Jada, I get it. I really do. But I've seen you play. I've heard your music. And I can tell you, you belong. She paused, letting her words sink in. You're not just anything. You've worked hard for this, and you have something special to share with the world. Don't let your doubts take that away from you. Jada smiled weakly, appreciating Ava's words. But the nervousness remained. She couldn't ignore the fact that she had a reputation to uphold now. People were starting to notice her, people who had power, influence, and connections. The weight of it felt like it could crush her. As the showcase event loomed closer, Jada found herself retreating to the practice room more than ever before. She spent hours fine-tuning every detail of her performance, making sure each note was perfect, each transition smooth. But no matter how much she practiced, the feeling of inadequacy still hung over her. What if she made a mistake? What if she froze on stage? The anxiety gnawed at her, and the thought of standing before that audience filled her with dread. One evening, after a particularly grueling practice session, Jada sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. She stared at the sheet music in front of her, but the notes seemed like a blur. Her head was spinning. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't playing for herself anymore. She was playing for approval, for validation. And that wasn't the way she had ever wanted it to be. With a sigh, Jada pushed away from the piano and grabbed her coat, heading out into the crisp evening air. She needed to clear her mind, to get some space from the relentless pressure. As she walked through the quiet campus, her footsteps echoing in the empty courtyard, she spotted a familiar figure sitting on one of the benches near the music building. It was Professor Harris, the music theory professor who had been one of her early mentors and advocates. "Jada," he said with a warm smile as she approached. "What's on your mind?" Jada hesitated for a moment, then sat down next to him. "I'm not sure, Professor. I thought I'd be excited about the showcase, but all I feel is pressure. I keep thinking I'm not good enough, that I don't belong there." Professor Harris nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. The spotlight can be a heavy burden, especially when you're still finding your way. But here's the thing, Jada, no one gets to where they are without first questioning whether they belong. And most of the time, that doubt never fully goes away. What matters is how you respond to it." She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" He smiled gently. "You can't let the fear of not being good enough hold you back. The best musicians are the ones who push through the doubt and keep going, regardless of how they feel. It's not about being perfect, Jada. It's about being true to yourself and your craft. You've already proven that you have the talent. But now, it's about believing in it, believing in yourself, even when you're scared." Jada felt the weight of his words settle deep within her. She had been so focused on her fear of not measuring up, she hadn't stopped to realize how far she had already come. She had worked hard for everything she had, and no amount of self-doubt could take that away from her. "Thank you, Professor," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I think I needed to hear that." He gave her a reassuring nod. "Anytime, Jada. You've got this. Just remember, no one expects you to be perfect. They just want to see your passion, your soul, and your music. That's what matters most." With a renewed sense of purpose, Jada stood up, feeling lighter than she had in days. As she walked back to her dorm, she could still feel the nerves, the uncertainty, but they no longer felt like obstacles. They were just part of the journey. She could do this. The night of the showcase arrived, and Jada stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. The auditorium was packed, and the dim stage lights cast long shadows across the room. Her palms were sweaty, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the seat of the piano. For a moment, she thought about backing out, about running away from the stage and the spotlight. But then she remembered what Professor Harris had said. She wasn't here to be perfect. She was here to share her music, her passion. And that was enough. Her name was called, and Jada took a deep breath before stepping into the spotlight. The audience fell silent as she walked to the piano, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. She sat down, her hands resting on the keys, and closed her eyes. The music was waiting for her. With a deep breath, Jada began to play. The notes filled the room, rich and full of emotion, the melody flowing effortlessly from her fingertips. Jada lost herself in the music, the nerves fading away as she focused solely on the piece before her. She poured every ounce of feeling into each note, every chord resonating with a depth she hadn't known she could express. As the final note echoed through the auditorium, Jada opened her eyes to see the audience's stunned silence. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first, but growing louder and louder until it was a thunderous roar. Jada smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek as she took a bow. For the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. She had done it, not for anyone else, but for herself. The weeks following Jada's performance were a whirlwind. The applause still echoed in her mind, a comforting reminder that she had faced her fears and come out stronger on the other side. It wasn't just the applause that lingered, though, it was the conversation that followed. After her performance, Professor Cohen, one of the competition judges, had sought her out backstage. "You're something special, Jada," he had said, shaking her hand with a genuine smile. "I wasn't sure what to expect when I heard your name. But after hearing you play, I'm convinced you've got a future in this field. Keep pushing yourself. You're not finished yet." That was all it took. One simple conversation that sparked a fire deep within her. For the first time, she truly believed that she could make it as a professional musician. But that belief didn't just come from her own efforts, it came from the affirmation of those who had witnessed her growth. Still, even with the recognition, the road ahead didn't get any easier. Jada faced a series of tough choices in the weeks that followed her performance, each one forcing her to examine her purpose, her identity, and what she truly wanted to achieve. One morning, as she sat in the student lounge, scrolling through emails, a particular message caught her eye. It was an invitation to audition for an internship with a prestigious music academy in New York. The academy was known for launching the careers of some of the most talented musicians in the world. The thought of such an opportunity made Jada's heart race, but there was a part of her that hesitated. She couldn't deny the pull of New York, the excitement, the endless possibilities. But she also couldn't ignore the fact that it would mean leaving behind everything she knew. Her family, her friends, her life at school, all of it would change in an instant. "Jada, you look like you've seen a ghost," Ava said, sitting down next to her with a cup of coffee. "What's going on?" Jada looked up, her fingers hovering over the keyboard of her laptop. "I got an offer. It's an audition for an internship at the New York Academy of Music. They're looking for students with potential, and I could be part of their program." Ava's eyes widened with excitement. "Oh my God! That's incredible. You have to go for it, Jada. Think about the exposure, the connections you could make. You've worked so hard for this moment." Jada bit her lip, uncertainty clouding her expression. "I don't know. It feels like I'm being asked to choose between everything I know and this amazing opportunity. What if I fail? What if I'm not ready?" Ava gave her a knowing look. "You're not going to fail, Jada. You've already proven yourself. This isn't about whether you're ready. It's about whether you're willing to take the leap. You can't let fear keep you from the life you deserve." Jada leaned back in her chair, taking in Ava's words. Deep down, she knew Ava was right. Fear had held her back for so long, and now it was time to stop letting it control her. The thought of leaving was daunting, but the thought of staying stagnant in one place forever was even worse. "I'll do it," Jada said finally, determination flooding her chest. "I'm going to take the leap. I have to." The day of the audition was a blur of nerves and excitement. Jada had arrived at the Academy's headquarters in New York the night before, staying at a small but cozy hotel near the venue. The city was alive with energy, its lights a stark contrast to the stillness of her thoughts. She had spent the entire evening practicing, running through her pieces one last time in the quiet of her hotel room. Now, as she stood in front of the grand building of the Academy, Jada's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. This was it. This was the moment that could define her future. The audition was intense. She walked into the large, imposing room and was immediately greeted by a panel of judges, 2 professors and one famous concert pianist who had performed all over the world. They asked her to perform several pieces, and for each one, Jada poured her soul into the music, using the vulnerability she had worked so hard to embrace. As she played, she could feel herself slipping into the music, letting it carry her. For the first time in a long while, there was no fear, no second-guessing. There was just the music. The sound of her fingers on the keys was all that mattered. When she finished, there was silence. For a moment, Jada felt her heart stop in her chest. Had she been too much? Had she done enough? Finally, one of the judges spoke up. "That was exceptional," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've demonstrated a rare gift. We can see that you're not just technically proficient. You bring something else to your performance, something raw and real. We believe you have the potential to be something great." Jada felt her breath catch in her throat. She had done it. She had been true to herself, and it had worked. But there was still one more hurdle to overcome. "Of course, this doesn't guarantee anything," the judge continued. "But we'll be in touch. You'll hear from us soon." Jada stepped out of the audition room, her legs trembling but her heart soaring. She had done everything she could, and no matter the outcome, she had proven to herself that she was ready. She had faced her fear and had embraced her potential. That evening, as she sat in her hotel room, waiting for the results, Jada reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the girl who had once doubted her own talent, who had questioned whether she belonged in the world of music. She was no longer that girl. She had grown, she had learned, and she had discovered that her voice, her music, was something worth sharing with the world. The phone buzzed on the table, breaking her thoughts. She grabbed it, holding her breath as she looked at the screen. It was an email from the Academy. Subject: Your audition results. Dear Jada, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the internship program at the New York Academy of Music. Your audition was impressive, and we believe you have the potential to excel in our program. We look forward to working with you and supporting your growth as an artist. Warm regards. Professor Lisa Rivera. New York Academy of Music. Jada could hardly believe it. She had done it. The door to her dream had opened wide. As she sat there in the quiet of her room, the enormity of it all washed over her. This was just the beginning. And she was ready to take the next step. New York City was a place of endless possibilities, vibrant, chaotic, and brimming with opportunities that could change lives in an instant. The thought of living there was both exhilarating and intimidating. Jada couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness as she prepared to make the move. She had just received her acceptance into the prestigious New York Academy of Music, and now the reality of it all was starting to sink in. The days following the acceptance email were a whirlwind of packing, paperwork, and preparation. Jada's parents, who had always supported her dreams from a distance, were surprisingly emotional when they realized their daughter was really leaving for New York. They had always seen her potential, but now they were beginning to understand just how big the world could be for her. "You sure about this, baby girl?" her father asked, his voice laced with concern as he helped her load her bags into the car. "New York's a long way from here. Are you ready for it?" Jada took a deep breath and smiled at her father, trying to push away the growing lump in her throat. "I think I am, Dad. I've been preparing for this for a long time." Her mother wrapped her arms around her in a tight hug. "We'll miss you, but we're so proud of you. Just remember to call home, okay?" "I will, Mom. I promise." Jada's voice trembled a little, but she quickly brushed it off. She was excited, yes, but there was also this feeling of uncertainty creeping in. She had worked so hard for this moment, and yet now that it was here, the reality of being on her own in a city like New York was both thrilling and overwhelming. When Jada arrived in New York, she was struck by the sheer magnitude of the city. The buildings seemed to reach into the sky endlessly, the streets crowded with people moving in every direction, and the noise, oh, the noise, was a constant hum in the background, like the city itself never stopped breathing. She could feel the pulse of the city as she walked through it, and for the first time in her life, she truly felt the weight of ambition pressing down on her. This was it, the place where dreams were made, where the competition was fierce, and where only the best survived. She arrived at the academy with a sense of awe. It was a beautiful, historic building filled with students from all over the world, each one talented and driven in their own right. Jada felt like a small fish in a vast ocean. It was hard not to compare herself to everyone around her, and the pressure to keep up with the expectations of the academy loomed large in her mind. That first week was a blur of orientation sessions, auditions for various programs, and meeting new classmates. It was everything Jada had imagined, and more. But as much as she wanted to jump into everything, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. She had come from a small town, and while her accomplishments at school had earned her recognition, here in New York, she was just another aspiring musician trying to make a name for herself. In one of her first classes, she met another student named Alex, a tall, confident guy with short cropped hair and a sharp jawline. He was a jazz pianist, and he had already established himself as one of the most talented students in their cohort. He was charismatic and outgoing, and it didn't take long for him to become the center of attention in the class. Jada tried to keep a low profile at first, but Alex quickly noticed her. He'd seen her perform at the showcase before she even arrived in New York, and now, he couldn't help but be impressed by her quiet intensity. "Hey," Alex said one day after class, catching up with Jada as she packed up her things. "I've been hearing a lot about you. You were amazing in that showcase performance. I'd love to play something with you sometime." Jada, still adjusting to the new pace of life in New York, smiled shyly. "Thanks. I'd love to. I'm just figuring out the schedule and everything right now." Alex flashed a grin. "No rush. We'll make it happen. But seriously, you've got talent. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do when you let loose." Jada's heart raced a little at the compliment. But she couldn't help but feel a little uneasy around Alex. He had that natural confidence that Jada struggled to cultivate. He didn't have the same self-doubt that she did, he seemed to think he could conquer the world with just his talent. It was hard not to feel overshadowed by that kind of energy, and she couldn't shake the fear that people might expect her to be as naturally gifted as Alex. As the weeks went by, Jada threw herself into her practice. She was determined not to let the pressure of the academy or the competitive environment get to her. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The music was still her refuge, her outlet for all the emotions that New York brought to the surface. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging practice session, Jada went for a walk to clear her head. She wandered through the streets of Manhattan, taking in the sounds of the city, the honking horns, the murmur of conversations, the tap of shoes on the pavement. It was busy, bustling, and vibrant, but in a way, it was also lonely. She didn't know anyone here, not really. She didn't have the comfort of home or the familiar faces she had left behind. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Ava. "How's everything going in New York? Are you adjusting okay?" Jada smiled, grateful for the reminder that she still had someone who cared about her back home. "It's a lot, Ava. It's overwhelming. But I'm doing my best. I'm pushing through." Ava replied almost immediately, "You've got this, girl. Remember, take it one day at a time. Don't forget to breathe." Jada chuckled, her shoulders loosening slightly. She had always relied on Ava's wisdom, and it was comforting to know that no matter where she was, her friend was just a message away. It was that reminder, that sense of connection, that grounded her. Yes, New York was intimidating, but she was here for a reason. She had earned her spot at the academy, and no matter how fierce the competition was, she belonged here. Her journey wasn't just about the destination, it was about the growth that would come with each step she took. The world was vast, but so was her potential. That night, after a long day of practice and reflection, Jada sat at the piano in her tiny apartment and played for the first time since her arrival in New York. She didn't play for anyone else. She played for herself. And as her fingers danced across the keys, the music filled the room like a warm embrace. She was here. She was doing this. And, despite all the uncertainty, Jada knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, stop her from reaching her dreams. Jada woke up to the bright lights of New York streaming through her window, a familiar warmth chasing away the remnants of the night's dreams. It had been almost a month since she moved to the city, and while the excitement of it all had yet to fully fade, the weight of her new life had started to set in. There was so much to learn, so much to do, and it seemed like the more she practiced, the more she realized just how much there still was to improve. The academy had already begun to test her in ways she never expected. Each day was a challenge. Every class, every practice session, every rehearsal with other students felt like a battle to prove herself, to show that she wasn't just a country girl who had gotten lucky by winning a competition, but a serious, capable artist with a future. Her professor, Dr. Meadows, was a brilliant musician, but he was also one of the most demanding teachers she had ever encountered. He wasn't unkind, but he expected nothing less than perfection, and Jada found herself constantly on edge in his class. Every note she played was scrutinized. Every minor slip-up was corrected. And while she appreciated his commitment to pushing her to be better, it left her feeling vulnerable, exposed, and sometimes, just plain exhausted. It wasn't just Dr. Meadows' critiques that wore her down, it was the competition that surrounded her. The other students at the academy were just as hungry as she was, maybe more so. They were already established musicians in their own right, some with extensive performance experience, others with connections that made Jada feel like an outsider. There were days when she wondered if she belonged in a place that seemed to demand so much, where everyone else seemed so much further along. Alex, the confident jazz pianist who had noticed her early on, was one of those people. They had started to practice together on occasion, which Jada both appreciated and dreaded. He had a natural charisma, an ease at the piano that seemed to pour effortlessly from his fingertips. He had been raised in a musical family, and his technical skills were impressive, but it was his attitude, his belief in himself, that made him stand out in the crowd. Today, he approached her in the hallway after class, his usual bright smile on his face. "Hey, Jada. You got a minute?" he asked, his voice light but enthusiastic. Jada pushed her hair back, trying to hide the fact that she was already mentally drained from the day. "Sure, what's up?" "I was thinking we should collaborate on a new piece." "Something big for the end-of-term concert," Alex suggested, clearly excited. "I know we've been focusing on the basics, but I think you're ready to go bigger. What do you think?" Jada hesitated. A part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to jump into something new, but another part of her wanted to retreat, to hide in the safety of her own practice and stay within her comfort zone. I don't know, Alex," she said softly. "I've been so focused on my other work. I'm not sure I can take on something else right now." Alex raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Come on, you've got the talent. I see it. I know you're capable of more than just the pieces you've been practicing. Don't sell yourself short." Jada couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. She wasn't sure if Alex understood how hard it was to be constantly under pressure, always trying to keep up with everyone else. "I just need to focus, you know. I'm not ready for anything big right now." Alex didn't push her further, but his words lingered in the air. She knew he meant well, but the last thing she needed was more pressure. What if she wasn't good enough for something bigger? What if she failed? After Alex left, Jada stood there for a moment, staring at the floor. She had made so much progress, and yet, there was always this nagging feeling that she was falling short. No matter how much she practiced, it was never enough. That night, Jada found herself sitting at her piano, staring at the keys as if they were a distant world she couldn't quite reach. She thought about Alex's offer and the pressure that came with it. There were so many expectations now, expectations from the academy, from her classmates, and most of all, from herself. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe this was the test she needed to face. Was she going to back down, or was she going to push through the doubt and take the risk? As her fingers touched the keys, the sound filled the room, and for a brief moment, she let go of everything else. She played for herself, not for anyone's approval, not for the competition, but simply because it was what she loved to do. And in that moment, she remembered why she was here, to share the music she had inside, to let it out without fear or hesitation. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She stopped playing and opened it to find her roommate, Taylor, standing in the doorway. "You okay?" Taylor asked, noticing the tension in Jada's face. "I'm fine," Jada replied, giving a small, tight smile. "Just practicing." Taylor walked in and sat down on the edge of Jada's bed. "I know you're stressed out. I can see it in your eyes. But, Jada, you don't have to carry this all on your own. The pressure isn't going to stop. But you have to learn to carry it with grace. You don't have to prove anything to anyone but yourself." Jada took a deep breath. Taylor's words hit her like a wave, washing away some of the tension that had been building up inside. She had been so focused on meeting others' expectations that she had forgotten to trust herself. Maybe it was time to stop worrying about what others thought and simply trust the journey. "I've been trying too hard," Jada admitted, sitting down beside Taylor. "I've been so focused on proving myself that I forgot why I started this in the first place. I'm here because I love music. I need to remember that." "That's the spirit," Taylor said, grinning. "You've got this, Jada. You always have." Jada smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to be the best at everything. She just had to keep going, one note at a time, trusting herself and the process. The following weeks were a turning point for Jada. She stopped comparing herself to others and focused more on her own growth. She practiced with intention, balancing the pressure with moments of peace. Slowly, she began to see improvements, not just in her technique, but in her confidence. She was learning to trust her instincts, to take risks without fearing the outcome. The end-of-term concert came faster than expected, and Jada was ready. She didn't choose a grand piece like Alex had suggested, but instead, she chose something that spoke to her, the very music she had been playing in her room when she'd first rediscovered her passion. When she stepped onto the stage, the nerves were still there, but so was the quiet confidence that had come from within. She wasn't performing for anyone else. She was performing for herself. And that was enough. Jada had never felt such a mix of emotions. As the night of the end-of-term concert approached, the intensity of the past few weeks settled into her chest like a weight, but with a sense of determination she had never known before. The months of self-doubt, sleepless nights, and relentless practice were finally coming to a head. This was her moment, not just to prove herself to the academy, to her peers, or to anyone else, but to prove something to herself. New York had challenged her in every way possible. The bustling city had swallowed her whole, and for a time, she had felt like she might not make it. But now, standing at the edge of the concert stage, she realized just how much she had grown. She wasn't the same person who had arrived in the city months ago, uncertain and insecure. She was stronger, more confident, and ready to let the world hear her music. The concert hall buzzed with energy. The students gathered backstage, each one preparing for their turn to perform. Jada could feel the tension in the air, the nervous chatter of her classmates, the constant shifting as people rehearsed and fine-tuned their pieces. But despite the noise around her, Jada felt a strange sense of calm. For once, she wasn't consumed by comparison or competition. She wasn't worried about what Alex or anyone else thought. She was focused on the music, the one thing that had always been her anchor. This performance wasn't about being the best. It was about being authentic, sharing her soul through her music. Alex was backstage too, his confident smile never far from his face. He was preparing for his own performance, and Jada couldn't help but admire the ease with which he carried himself. She remembered the first time they had met, when she had been intimidated by his effortless talent. Now, they were both here, on the same stage, about to perform for the world. Jada. Alex called as he approached her, his voice light and friendly. I can't wait to see you perform tonight. You've got this. Just remember, don't think too much about it. You've worked so hard. Just play like you always do. Jada nodded, smiling at him. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. I'll do my best. As the concert began, one by one, the students took the stage, each performance more impressive than the last. Jada watched with a mix of admiration and humility. Everyone had their own style, their own strengths. It was clear that she wasn't the only one who had worked tirelessly for this moment. The music filled the hall, creating an atmosphere of shared passion, talent, and perseverance. Finally, it was Jada's turn. Her name was called, and she stood up, feeling a brief moment of nerves before they faded. She walked to the grand piano, her heart beating steadily, her mind focused. The spotlight shone down on her as she took her seat, and for a moment, everything else seemed to blur away. The audience, the academy, the competition, it all disappeared. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and she took a deep breath. The first notes she played were soft, almost tentative, but as the music grew, so did her confidence. She had chosen a piece that was deeply personal, one that she had written herself, a composition that spoke to her struggles, her triumphs, and everything she had learned since arriving in New York. It was raw, emotional, and entirely her own. Each note felt like a reflection of her journey. As her hands moved across the keys, the sound filled the room, and Jada could feel the connection between herself and the audience. She wasn't performing to impress them or to compete. She was simply sharing a part of herself that had always been hidden, a part of her that only music could express. The more she played, the more she let go. The music flowed through her like a river, and she felt every note with every fiber of her being. Her body swayed gently with the rhythm, her emotions pouring out through the piano. This wasn't just a performance, this was a release. For the first time in months, Jada felt free. As the final note lingered in the air, a profound silence filled the room. Jada's fingers hovered over the keys for a second, unsure of what to do next. Then, the audience erupted into applause, loud, enthusiastic, genuine. Jada's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. She had done it. She had shared her music, and the world had heard it. When the applause began to settle, she stood up, bowing to the audience, her face flushed with emotion. The recognition was humbling, but it wasn't what mattered most to her. What mattered was that she had found her voice, not just as a pianist, but as a person. Jada left the stage feeling lighter than she had in a long time, the weight of doubt lifted off her shoulders. As she walked back to the wings, Alex was waiting for her, his eyes wide with admiration. "You were incredible, Jada," he said, his voice filled with awe. That was something else." Jada smiled, her chest still racing. "Thank you. It felt right, you know. It felt like me. It was definitely you." "I've never heard anything like it," he replied, still beaming. Jada felt a sense of accomplishment, not just because of the performance, but because she had overcome the fear of being herself. She wasn't trying to be someone else anymore. She wasn't trying to fit into any mold. She had found her place in the world, and she was ready to carve her own path forward. Later that night, as Jada sat in her small apartment, reflecting on the evening, she couldn't help but feel grateful. She had come so far, from the shy, insecure girl who had stepped off the plane in New York to the confident artist who had just performed her heart out in front of an audience. There was still a long road ahead, and she knew the challenges of the city and the academy would continue to test her. But for the first time, Jada was sure of one thing: she was ready. Ready to embrace the challenges, to learn from every failure, to grow with every success. And most importantly, ready to keep making music, because that was what she was meant to do. The city, the academy, the competition, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the music, and the journey ahead. Jada had found her place. And nothing would stop her from reaching her dreams. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?